Welcome everyone to this week's wonderful community call. This one has been in the making for longer than you can imagine. You will learn about that in a second. First of all, I have with me today someone who probably needs no introduction, Jaya, Nym CSO. How is it going?
It's going
And
super
also, of
well.
course, excellent. And also, of course, as you know from the announcement, we also have Dr. Nick, aka Nick Almond from FactoryDAO. How's it going, sir?
Very good, mate. Thank you very much for having me along.
Let's talk about FactoryDAO for just a quick second, if people are not familiar with what it is. It's more like a DAO factory, if I'm not mistaken, the place to build, launch, and manage your own DAO. So the goal is to have 1,000 DAOs a day set up, which is quite a bold objective. How are you doing with that objective so far?
Yeah, we're not 1,000 a day yet. But yeah, no. So my sort of vision for FactoryDAO was to create a system for launching permissionless DAOs in a kind of modular fashion. Been challenging over the last couple of years because everyone's super bearish on DAOs. So we're currently lensing this into more direct use cases around governing AIs and LLMs. So yeah, we're trying to sort of point DAOs at the AI issue and see what happens.
Excellent. The AI issue it is, which is going to be something that we talk about quite a bit today. So before we get into that, the usual housekeeping items. Folks, we'd love to have you with us. Thanks for joining. And if you have any questions to me, Jaya, or Nick, you can leave them here in the YouTube chat or also on the Twitch chat. We're keeping a close eye on both chats. And if you want to preserve your privacy and not log in with your YouTube or Twitch account, you can also go to the Nym Matrix server and leave your questions there. You also keep an eye there. First, of course, we're going to be having the conversation about privacy in the age of AI, which is a very fascinating one. And then at the end, we're gonna be moving over to community questions. Now, with all of that said, this, Jaya, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if you even remember Shipyard Academy Lecture 5, which you gave about 700 million years ago. It feels like. To me,
Vaguely, I think I had some pictures of my brother and his kids and some bonfire and various other bits and pieces in the presentation. I have some vague memories of it. Yes.
that was a different one, but anyways, the link will be shared with the community because in my eyes, that convo was really a prelude to this one, which we've been basically working towards all this time with Nym, and it's excellent to have Nick along for the ride because this is a topic that you also have been on your mind for quite some time, namely privacy in the age of AI. Now, to frame this discussion, I want to talk about the type of AI that we mean these days when we say AI, right? Because contrary to popular belief, AI is nothing new. In fact, it's been pointed at your brains and mining your attention for basically 2 decades now. But recently, there was a bit of a revolution in the AI space with a paper called "Attention is All You Need," which came out from Google. And since then, LLMs took center stage. So basically, when we talk about AI these days, those are large language models mostly, and they are generative AI. So it's not only pointed at your brain now to mine your attention and make you watch content to get you addicted to different platforms. But you can also generate all kinds of text and images with this type of AI. Now, what's new with this AI is like a sort of a refreshed discussion of a whole bunch of, well, either real or supposed implication of this technology, which could be, ushering in a post-labor economy where we don't have to work anymore because all of our work is done by AI, whether you believe it or not. Also, of course, ushering in the end of humanity and a dystopia where humans become subservient to AIs like Skynet from the Terminator series, whether you believe that or not. Some people say that it's just a narrative driven by AI companies to meet their own needs and to push their own agendas. You make your own decision when it comes to that. But it's also, the implication is also possibly that AI is going to, or this generative AI is going to usher in a post-truth world, right? And a dead internet where AI-generated garbage and misinformation floods everything and destroys our information ecosystem. And I don't think you need to believe it or believe in this one. You just need to look around on the internet today, and you can already see, after this short time since ChatGPT and other such tools have been out, that this is quite a prescient concern from people, right? But if you want to talk about that stuff, you can, or like listen to that stuff, you can go to the 1 million different AI podcasts that popped up in the past year or so. So we're not primarily going to talk about that stuff, because while we're talking about AI safety a lot and we're talking about AI and the revolution itself a lot, we don't talk about the privacy implications of AI too much. So that is what this discussion is going to be about and focused on today. So the main topic here that is interesting for us when it comes to privacy, at least one of the main ones, is that this generative AI, so large language models, are trained on data sets, right? And the more data an AI model is trained on, the more powerful it is. And we basically already see AI companies running out of training data. That's one of the big questions where the rest of the data is going to come from, right? So that's just one of the many implications when it comes to this new AI revolution and our individual privacy. Now, of course, when we think about ChatGPT, we could say, or someone might say, that ChatGPT doesn't know anything about me, doesn't need to know anything about me. You know, if I ask it to create some food from the ingredients in my fridge, all it needs to do is, or all the data that it needs to have is basically, you know, a bunch of cookbooks and stuff like that. So why would ChatGPT or generative AI or large language models be a unique threat to our individual privacy? So maybe let's start with this question, actually. Is there a unique threat of generative AI when it comes to individual privacy? And if so, what it is? Nick, let's start with you. Or Jaya, you want to go first?
Well, yeah, I feel like you just did this whole intro, and at every point I was like, well, actually, well.
Okay, we can start with the actuallys.
Okay, the big well, actually, and this segues nicely into the topic of this session, is on the term AI per se, right? So, as you mentioned, it's a term that's been around a couple of decades now. What's also nice to kind of realize is that it was a term that was invented purely for marketing and fundraising purposes, right? But which then took on a life of its own and a narrative on its own, as this kind of powerful story of machines versus humans. But I think what's important to start to unpack there is that that's exactly the problem, right? Is that narrative, machines versus humans, because actual reality never plays out that way. It's always some humans and their machines versus other humans and their machines. And it's always a collaborative effort, right? But who gets to collaborate and under what terms is the open question mark, right? So, for example, you know, when you say, you know, when you're pushing a kind of narrative around AI and as this human versus machine narrative, there is the utopian and dystopian version of that, like you said, Sudo, but that's a false conflict, because that's not really where the kind of real world conflict is. The real world conflict is who gets to make money off of these new technologies and who's actually doing like all the hardcore labor of either like mining the minerals that go to produce the chips that need to be used in order to, you know, or the people that are kind of doing all the data labeling and have to watch like, you know, insane kind of content day in and day out and end up with major mental health problems, right? So what we see here is a kind of an entire industry and a whole data pipeline that gets erased in favor of this super simplified idea of like, we have humans and then we have machines, and now there's going to be this big conflict. And that's actually not what's happening, neither now nor in the future. No matter how powerful LLMs get, it's always going to be some humans and their machines basically fucking over other humans and their machines, unless those other humans and their machines, you know, come together as a strong community and run mixed nets and other strong privacy preserving tech and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's kind of like, you know, I think very important to note, also because that's when we can start having the interesting conversation around privacy, because that's when we're looking at the industry behind it. What are the resources? What's the raw material that goes into, you know, this industry that hides behind that narrative of AI, either as dystopia or utopia.
Excellent. Well, actuallys. Does Nick also have some actuallys for my intro there?
I think I'm just going to agree with both of you. I think what Jay's alluding to there is kind of like how the sausage is made of AI, and underneath the surface there is a lot of humans. You know, we talked about the data labeling practices at the moment, and some of those are really despicable. So a lot of the way that AI is like the data is curated is in basically like modern slave labor. done for the cheapest labor that's found on the planet. That's one of the issues. But you're very right about the AI is nothing new. In fact, it's been coming long before we were born, right? So this narrative is, I think that's one of the reasons why it's generating a huge hype at the moment. Not only are we seeing the outcomes, the practical outcomes of the technology being realized, but it's been coming for a long time. And really what the major breakthrough is from the transformer models is that you can scale into efficacy of the outcomes through compute and data. So we've just hit this paradigm of pouring in more and more data into these things, and they get better and better and better. And we're still in this kind of linear scaling phase of AI. And I actually think it's going to hit a ceiling relatively soon, partly because we're running out of data. So, but it involves massive flow of tokens into these models. And largely we've just been
We lost Nick. Am I
getting
the
more
only
and
one who
more
lost Nick for a second there? Sorry, Nick, we lost you for a second there. Can you please go back to about 5 seconds?
Yeah, sure. I just got a little pop-up interruption, but hopefully you can hear me now. So yeah, I was basically saying like the data flows of where we're going through. Roughly GPT-5 will have exhausted all the available tokens on the internet. So, and including data repositories that are gated and they've paid for and what have you. But the flow of information into these models that does improve them has been exhausted. So largely where I've been thinking about this is where it goes next. And there's a real obvious move into sourcing new data sources that are very localized into people's context. So there's a move to take over your browser. So these agentic models, the AI assistants, are better if they're more personalized to you with your personal data. So we're starting to see this move into data pipelines that are very driven by your personal contextual data. And the motivation for this is personalization and personal AIs. And so my broad thesis for this is this is finally going to get to the point where people actually revolt against this practice. We've been data mined for years, like Jay was saying. Classic machine learning algorithms have effectively like fracked us for data for a couple of decades, but largely people have been kind of comfortable with it because it's been very subtle. But the AIs are going to move into, it's going to start creeping people out. And I think this is a huge opportunity for privacy technologies because it'll be really evident the level of corporate surveillance that's happening to people. And that's kind of largely where my head is at the moment.
Where's your head at, Jaya?
My head is at 1,000 different things today, but on this topic, I think that's super interesting, Nick, and I would actually love. I'm not sure what you're kind of working on in the day to day, but there is. It's been a kind of dream of mine for a long time to really map out the data pipeline in quite some detail. Because it also seems to me like there's a lot of different things going on. There's like the personalization, as you mentioned, that I think is like super important to try and get our heads around of like just what's going on there in terms of invasive data extraction or data fracking, which is a great term. But I also, I mean, I've also kind of tried to dip into a little bit the kind of emerging industry of synthetic data, which I'm not sure how much is going on there, but I know that that's also kind of like growing as an industry. And that's, my sense is that that's, obviously less around personalization and more around like automation and maybe more B2B industrial scale deployment of artificial intelligence. But I think, like synthetic data is, and if you look at the kind of deeper philosophical implications of synthetic data, it kind of like poses some really neat questions around what is the type of intelligence that's really being kind of grown here, and it kind of like detaches like AI from kind of real world, let's say, kind of more like Enlightenment scientific practices and more into kind of like more like design, really, kind of our own, designing automation effectively is what it is. But I thought we could also go back to one of the kind of earlier points around like bigger is better and maybe look into that a bit more as well and how that might move forward when it comes to personalization, because Yes, a lot of these models, are just scraping everything possible and anything available to produce these kind of very large models. And we know now that there's a lot of consequences to that, both environmental, human, social, and of course on the privacy front. I'm still trying to understand, and this is where both you and Sudo might have had, the chance to do a bit more research. I'm still trying to understand the claim around like bigger is better, because I'm also seeing other people claiming that it's in fact not better, and really questioning what is it better for. And that actually smaller data sets with much more kind of clean data that is like accurate and well curated is producing very good results at kind of like lower energy costs and human costs. So that's kind of one point. And then I also wonder, in parallel, I have a bit of a hypothesis that the bigger is better kind of agenda is to some extent like ideologically driven. Meaning that like, there is this pursuit, this almost religious pursuit of an AGI, and the idea that intelligence can be generalized and isn't always situational and contextual, which is kind of where I'm coming from. And in order to kind of achieve that AGI, or the kind of coming global intelligence, you really need to suck all of reality into a model in order for the model to be considered generalized. So that there is almost like actually what's going on here is like a kind of almost like an ideological and religious drive towards super intelligence, rather than and a scientific or industrial necessarily, or even anything closely related to like real use cases almost.
I find myself completely agreeing with you there, Jay. I think that, so yeah, there's a few things to touch on there. I think that kind of piece about the data pipeline and synthetic data, this is one of the reasons why you need this human context. Intelligence is in fact deeply contextual, social, incredibly varied across many different environments and cultures, and actually synthetic data is one of the things that I think it does expand the data sets, which makes them more powerful. So I think Llama's recent giant model 4015B, which was 50 times the compute of Llama 2, which was already quite powerful. They used a lot of synthetic data pipelines for that. So basically what they were doing is bulking out the tokens by taking existing language and transforming it into multiple languages. So that model is better and better at understanding languages across different languages. And they've bulked it out with synthetic data for that. But it tests very badly on mathematical reasoning. And this is one of the reasons why the bigger is better thing doesn't necessarily play out like that. There's the kind of, and it is a kind of like ideological, it's becoming ideological, but it's motivated by the capital. It's like we found a game where we can put more money in, burn more money, put more data in, extract more data, just keep going, and we get better and better and better. And that's incredibly alluring, because it just means I just need to give Sam Altman another $5 billion or another $10 billion, and we scale our way to God, right? And it's just not going to play out like that. It's gonna flatten out, and you can't just, in theory, you can keep grabbing this data, and it will be better, right, in certain contexts. So the next frontier is going to be specialization and curation. The amount of advancement you can get in simply optimizing that data. At the moment, we've just kind of thrown it all very like unstructured data into a giant pot and then just thrown these transformer models at them. But actually, you can outperform GPT on basically any knowledge domain with a specialized data set. So a big part of what I'm interested in is how you can sort of reconnect like humanity back into these systems and build a synergistic relationship between people and their data. And the data is valuable. And one of the things that I think we'll see is companies essentially, like the next like realm is agentic behavior. And to do that, these models need to essentially make their own prompts. So they keep prompting themselves in a sequence. And the quality of how good that sequence is how well it knows how people behave over a period of time. So really what you need is the data of people behaving longitudinally. So rather than a snapshot, the ideal data is that we can just surveil people working And if we get this perfect surveillance of people working in an organization, for example, over time, we can replace them by just watching how they've done it enough. And that's really the next realm, right? So we'll see massive like corporate surveillance, both internally as people just watch their employees in the hope that they can start replacing them with automated behavior. And really that richness of the data does move into these much more contextual spaces. And to get it, it's going to have to move into these much more surveillance orientated practices. We're going to hit these limits. We can't scale away to God. And the next thing to do is just more surveillance, more data. And that's largely where the sort of game is moving.
And I guess just to kind of clarify, Agentic here is related to, kind of little AI helpers that you might install to kind of like Otter tracking, writing your notes for your meetings and this sort of thing.
Exactly. It's worth playing with, actually. There's one that you can play with called Auto GPT. And it just shows you how it works. And it's worth watching because of how bad it is. Because LLMs hallucinate, they unravel as they start to do this sequential behavior, and they just end up on a track very quickly that's completely off where you wanted them to go. And the way that you improve that is watching people work to build these methodological data sets that are much deeper. So yeah, in order to get them, you have to watch people in real time, if you like. And that's what these little agents, these little helper agents are going to be doing. The recent Microsoft one literally takes a screenshot of it watches your screen in real time and stores it and runs inference on it. Total surveillance of your operating system. So really that's what we've got to look forward to next, basically.
It was really nice to see the backlash against what was it called? I can't remember the tool that was that Microsoft released, which takes screen search. Yeah, Recall. So there was a major backlash. They even had to actually like push back the release and tune some things back quite a bit. Now, what I wanted to like add some to, actually, which both of you sort of mentioned different sides of, in my opinion, is the coming agentic AI. Auto GDP, for those of you who don't know, basically is ChatGPT prompting itself. So two instances of ChatGPT or multiple instances of ChatGPT prompting each other to a given end. So this tool has agency, and you can ask it to do things like get a plane ticket for you or all kinds of interesting things. So the reason why agents are so big is because the vibes I'm getting from people who are close to the AI space, journalists and stuff like that, is that we're pouring all of this money, just to your point, Jaya, about the ideological or religious drive, and also to your point, Nick, about putting money and data in, and we get better and bigger and much number go up. This, quite surprisingly, is actually partnered with the fact that people don't understand yet how to make money of this. The reason why we push agents is because they think that maybe agents will be this breakthrough. We're putting all of these resources into it, immense amounts of compute. Microsoft is building a $20 billion compute center, I believe, just strictly for AI, which is like that's a large portion of some countries' GDP, right? But still, at this point in time, nobody knows actually how we're going to be making money off of this. And people actually, even without name, some people in the AI space even said that at this point, it's worth it for them to be in the space and putting all of these resources down, even without knowing how it's going to turn into actual money, than the alternative cost, which would be missing out on this revolution, which to me is like an insane, absolutely insane mindset. But this is the mindset of like the mindset of surveillance capitalism, and capitalism in general is like carried through into AI like perfectly. And it's just like the continuation of the next thing, basically this gold rush where we're pouring resources in, and we don't even know like what those resources are going to get us and how it's going to turn into actual money.
I mean, a good way to think of this is financialized data, right? So just like the financial system is kind of detached from real economy and holds out this promise of something in the future that will come. It's the same thing with AI, right? It's like, I think Meredith Whittaker from Signal has also called it data derivatives. So like very kind of it's within that kind of financialized mentality.
It is, and it's like classic Moloch type like action, right? Where it's just this thing that's worked, and all we need to do is keep feeding the beast, and it'll get better and better and better. And the because it creates this like economic dynamic, which is just like output quality with data and energy that goes in, that's working at the moment. They've managed to raise huge amounts of money, which creates this feedback loop. Soon as money starts getting YOLO'd into the billions of seed rounds and the hundreds of millions and all this sort of stuff.
YOLO'd and FOMO'd, no?
Yeah, exactly. So it's just it's a hype cycle, right? So it reminds me very much of the .com. I'm just about old enough to remember the .com boom in the sort of 90s, and this has the potential to be an even bigger one because it just promises this global transformation. But I think you're quite right, Sudo. The kind of actually the use cases, the implementation is just not happening. We could stop now with the models that we've got, like with the open source model that we've got, 401b, particularly with Llama. You could do huge transformative work. Like there's absolutely the entire disciplines and practices and industries could be completely reformed just with that model, just the application of that model. But yeah, we're stuck in this trap of just like accelerating the development of something that we don't know how to use yet. And because it's focused on the kind of tip of the spear of the state of the art, this is where the narratives around AI safety and all that sort of stuff come in to try and ossify this oligopoly. So really, there's a race here. It's not really about creating anything useful. It's about capturing the market and cementing an oligopoly and building mind share. It's really the kind of Uber style model of let's inject like GPT into the minds of the world and subsidize the use of it until it's an AI is synonymous with GPT. And then we'll figure out how to make the money, which could be, decades away.
Anything to add there, Jaya? Because I have this topic that I wanted to bring up within a discussion with you specifically, Jaya, for about 8 years at this point, and I'm gonna do that right after you comment on anything that you wanted to comment on.
No, I agree with Nick's riff. I think it is about solidifying mind share and market share before having anything to offer of real value to humanity, and also to destroy as many competitors and things in the process. And that's kind of like, I mean, that model is almost like the Amazon model, really, right? So destroy any kind of alternative and take over entire sectors.
Yes.
With no consideration of how it benefits ordinary people.
Yes, tried and true framework for that. Now, what I wanted to ask or like add just very quickly, Nick, to your open source is the square quotes to the Llama models, because they are open source. But if you want the weights, you need to license those from Meta. I don't know if you're aware. So it's not actually open, but it's like a major step towards open source, at least compared to the other models that we have. But venturing into a different area, which I hear some whispers in this area that we like in this realm of thought that we're discussing right now when it comes to privacy concerns regarding AI and just the general implications of it. But what I don't hear a lot of people talk about, which I think is a really pressing issue, is the fact that, like I mentioned, I do believe that we are actually headed into the dead internet theory. Like we do see like an insane amount of bot activity on all of the social media. You can see social media manipulation directly leading to like real world consequences, such as riots, such as aggression towards minorities. All of that stuff is actually happening right now in real time, right? So there's always been, and it's always been used, but now there is actually a more and more real and pressing argument to be made to, show some ID before we use the internet, right? Because the bots, some people are still fighting to tell apart bots from real people. they will all fail. It's impossible. It's actually impossible. We all know this, right? If you believe the dead internet theory, then actually basically 99% of everything you see on the internet is actually bot activity. I'm not that pessimistic, but definitely a large portion, and some pretty crucial portion as well, which leads to some pretty bad real world stuff, right? So just like we use all kinds of bad things that happen on the internet to as an argument against privacy preserving technologies, such as Tor, for example, or such as Tornado Cash, right? Which there was a bunch of money laundered on it, but there were also a lot of people using it for completely legitimate everyday purposes, right? But there's an easy argument to be made that if we allow this, then bad things will happen. So let's not have these privacy preserving technologies. In a similar way, I see that digital ID and tying internet usage to your digital ID is like it's an actual real concern now. I think sort of like an indirect but very real outcome of this AI revolution could be actually a strong argument for governments and regulators to move towards this direction. How do you see this threat, and what are your thoughts about it, Nick?
I think this is a very real thing to be worried about. There's active lobbying for exactly this. So there's a think tank called the Future of Life Institute, which is one of the kind of lobbying entities that have been very influential on the EU AI Act and the Silicon Valley regulation that's just passed through, which radically increases the cost of compliance for building AI models, which was one of the tactics is just to make it very, very expensive to develop AIs, and that sort of cements the oligopoly. So that's one of the angles of the kind of lobbyists. One of the others is to essentially amplify the risks of open source. So if you can convince everyone that these things are all going to be super dangerous and the building them in the open is dangerous, then you can try and kill open source as much as possible. One of the angles of doing this is using the misinformation deepfake kind of thing, and the dead internet thing is more of a prophecy. I think that's the trajectory as the internet fills up, especially with kind of these agents who can behave quite convincingly like people, and this kind of proof of personhood thing starts to go bigger and bigger. So one of the angles that they're pushing is that all AI models should have some disclaimer saying, this is an AI generated image, this is an AI generated piece of text. Now, open models don't do that. And even if they did, you could stop them doing that, right? Because they're open. So what this does is create the context where open models can be, illegal. If you passed that as a regulation, then all of a sudden open models are basically illegal. And that's a real danger. I do think that the ID thing, or tracking people to who made this generation, is the attack vector for killing open source, and it does worry me a lot.
I think we lost Sudo, but I'll pick up on that note anyway. There is a kind of really funny thing happening right now, right, where you see kind of biometrics all of a sudden pop up again as, biometrics used to be a kind of like identification method that was reserved for, sovereign states, really, right, and passports and that sort of thing. But over the past 10 years or so, biometrics has crept into lots and lots of, basically just tech companies and companies using that for with their end users, right? So there's a kind of funny moment when I was thinking about, of course, there was a lot of outrage around like WorldCoin, right? which Sam Altman kind of came up with, I think, in a kind of fever dream of like, some kind of creator's megalomaniac thinking, where he's like, I am creating AGI, but then we're going to have these social problems. So now I also need to create UBI for everybody. But if I create UBI, I need to create a global identity system. And then all of a sudden has this like insane plan, right, to scan everybody's eyeballs. And it's kind of one of those plans that comes when someone is just so detached from, other human beings and really doesn't perceive that, like, it's not all up to you, mate. Like if you're
Yes.
genuinely concerned with like the social implications of artificial intelligence, you would be picking up the phone to the trade unions, right? Not like coming up with some random like schematic. So, but what I kind of thought was quite interesting was like seeing the social reactions to this kind of WorldCoin idea and the spheres of scanning people's eyeballs and stuff, where everyone was kind of freaking out around this like random dude in this random project scanning, like taking your biometrics. But I didn't see any outrage for similar practices being done by Apple, right, for their devices, where it's like, okay, you scan either, or like you're scanning your face, or you're scanning your fingerprint or whatever. But it's kind of like a similar trend. It's like this attempt to try and I think you're correct there, Sudo. It's like verifying the human in the midst of the potential death of the internet. But I think it's a piecemeal, ad hoc, and knee-jerk reaction that is it's a real shame. It's like we'll fumble our way into a kind of shit show, even more so by doing that. And I am hoping that like there is some scope for kind of regulators, policymakers, and innovators really to think at a scale beyond the siloed economic interest of a single company or the kind of paranoias of a regulator or policymaker, but actually kind of bridge that gap for a kind of like middle scale understanding of like, what is the state of the internet today, and how can we kind of arrive at a set of solutions that are sensible on a kind of like collective level. So, and here is where I think actually privacy plays a huge part. And one of the kind of potential avenues is instead of like taking everybody's biometrics and basically pushing humans to do more and more weird things to prove that they're human, right? Like, I don't know if you guys, when you get like a kind of, I think it's like Revolut app or something where you're just like, you have to kind of move your head around or do some like all these like weird things to prove that you're actually a human.
Or the CAPTCHAs, the more and more elaborate CAPTCHAs, which are basically impossible to solve.
Yeah.
Right. But I wonder if there's like, there's another avenue where it's like, we're not, where we almost like, look more at kind of like the ideas around secure enclaves, right? Where it's like, and we take a different unit of communication rather than the wide open internet that's a total shit show and open for like insane levels of fraud, and more like a kind of like squad unit, right? Where it's like the group chats that are all through kind of encrypted messaging, and that's how you share information. And it's more this kind of decentralized kind of web of trust model, this sort of stuff. Like, I think there's a lot of like immune system moves here that we could do in the information space that feel like it would be a little bit of a nicer future than like jumping around in front of a machine to prove that you're still human. Before you just do the most banal things, right? Before you just like are able to like buy a cinema ticket or some basic thing like this.
Yeah, I'll touch on WorldCoin a little bit because I'm not a fan, to say the least. I think it's it's a horrific dystopian technology that is one of the grimiest things I've ever seen, and the practices that thing was rolled out of is enough evidence that you need that the way that it was rolled out through literally rural Kenyan villages and places like that, and really just to get metrics up, right, and proving that it's a scaling technology. Again, it's another one of these where it's like, look what percentage of the world's population I've on-ramped into my technology, and that just gives me another reason for a ridiculous valuation of it, regardless of whether it incentivizes the creation of like eyeball farms, literally. So the right now there is people rounding up humans, paying them to go to eyeball orbs, and then using them as kind of proxy slaves to like, just in case they get, you know, UBI through this one day. It's a ridiculous thing and lazy. And you're quite right, Jay, that the root to this is kind of webs of trust and building up like levels of humanity that we can be assured of, because there's human interaction at the local level and in communities. And if communities can trust people, then, you know, then those people can be trusted in other communities. And there's ways to build out organic levels of proof and personhood without just going to this kind of lazy biometrics option. And biometrics generally are just should go nowhere near blockchains. It's bad enough, you know, if it's the data is stored locally. But people really need to understand that if they attest information about themselves to a blockchain, it's basically there forever. And as we know, things like Tornado Cash, there's dApps that are perfectly fine one day, and then are, if you've ever touched it, you're a terrorist, right? So having apps in your blockchain history, and then you're going in and uploading your degree certificates and your eyeballs to it or whatever, could be a really terrible idea. So really, there should be no personal identifying information put on blockchains ever. So that just isn't a solution, no matter how much the privacy is. And the real worry about WorldCoin is whether nation states pick it up and start using it, and then just decide to turn the privacy aspects off, because then they've got a system that will allow them to issue their digital identities and revoke them remotely from people that don't behave, which is really the end game for everything going wrong. So yeah, we're right next to these kind of like terrible these like dystopian technologies are like happening right now. So yeah, that's why we need things like Nym, right?
You see me smiling because this was my master plan all along. Alternatives to digital ID and proof of personhood, which literally has been a conversation I wanted to have Jaya on for about 2 years now. We're not going to do justice to it today, but maybe we can use this to prelude the next conversation, which will be the ID paradigm versus the credential paradigm. So for you, Nick, I'm not sure whether you're aware of the Coconut credential scheme that Nym has. One of our core technologies next to the Mixnet is the Coconut credential scheme, which is a zero knowledge credential technology. Basically, the idea being that you can prove personhood or whatever you want to prove, ownership or whatever, with zero knowledge tech without exposing anything other than the fact that you purchased something, you're the person who you say you are, you're vaccinated against COVID or whatever it may be. So I think this discussion about the inevitable coming of digital ID, I see that kind of inevitable at this point because of the AI revolution partly and the dead internet. We should also probably be realistic here and talk about some alternatives to the dystopian tech of digital ID. Jaya, what are your thoughts?
Well, Sudo, I'm glad you asked. Yes, we have been meaning to have this conversation for a long time, and it won't do it justice, but just the kind of like very quick soundbite is that, digital ID, bad, credentials, good, right? And the reason is digital ID, if you think about it, kind of what is identity? Identity, it kind of on a really much deeper level is something that is like constantly shifting, and it's not a stable thing. It's something that is created in relations. So as we go about our lives, we build relationships to people, places, this and that shapes our identity. So because it's unstable at its core, when you create kind of identity systems, what they're really about is ongoing surveillance. It's this idea of constantly trying to fix people in place from a systems perspective. So my philosophy is that basically ordinary humans do not need identity systems, only systems do. Ordinary humans need access to services. So a lot of the times what systems try to persuade people of is that you need your digital identity because that's what you need in order to get access to XYZ resource. What we're trying to say is that that's actually not true. You can give people access to resources and place conditions on those access credentials. So place conditions on that access by using credentials. And those credentials can be privacy preserving, right? So, and that can be like, the way that we're using credentials, the ZK Nym credentials, the Coconut credentials now is to enable privacy preserving payment for the Nym VPN that we're building, right? So here we can say like, okay, so What is the service that people need access to? It is privacy, right? A VPN service that protects your communications in transit. What is the condition that we want to place on access to that service? A payment. And why do we want to take that payment? So we can make sure the infrastructure is sustainable and can function well over time, right? So that's the kind of like basic scenario. Do we need to know your name, your address, your credit card details, your wallet address, anything like this, your bank account, which bank you bank with, where that bank is located? Do we need all that information to enable you access to this privacy-preserving application? Ideally, no. Ideally, we don't want any of that information. Why? Because first of all, that places our business at risk. We don't want to hold this personal information about you. What happens with data leaks, all this sort of thing, it's going to be a mess. And second of all, we are a company that places privacy and the right to privacy as a fundamental right above and beyond everything else. So what we do is we use a credential as a proof of payment and delink, whatever payment method you've used from the actual usage of the service. So that's a very long-winded way to say that it's a major philosophical difference between digital IDs and credentials. Digital IDs is something that systems want because they want to know everything about you. Credentials are there in order to enable access to services, which is effectively what human beings want, and to enable fair access to those services. In our case, by enabling payments so that the service can continue to function.
I'll pick up on that a little bit. I think similarly, I've been thinking about this for quite a long time for people shaping power in DAOs, for example. So the DAOs at the moment are kind of limited by pure crypto economic decision making. So like one token, one vote. But this is where we'll explore sort of complex permissioning and access to protocols. There's some people who should have access to votes that will materially change the smart contract ecosystem. It might change the parameters on a DeFi protocol, for example. There are people that should have those rights because they understand how they work. And there's people who have no clue how they work and probably shouldn't be making those decisions. So that kind of credentialing structure for an identity, I need to know if you are capable of making those decisions, which you can prove to me over time. So building up notions of identity that's like aggregated trust through action and recording those actions and looking at how those actions have played out and histories of decision making. I don't need to know who you are if you're a productive member of that DAO. And I think that's so the world of kind of on-chain reputation is a very exciting one. But I've thought about it a lot, and there's a lot of ways it ends up very scary. And we're kind of working on homebrew social credit systems, right? And really the line just stays: can you stay pseudonymous at least in these things? So can you remain a pseudonym? And can I divorce myself from that reputation and start a new one if I want? And I think that's basically the only line that I can see that ends up in good outcomes. As soon as you start building in real connections to personhood and identifiability to real people, then it just ends up in really dangerous territories. So I think remaining pseudonymous and protecting that as a fundamental human right is absolutely necessary. And we say this in the context of like today, the UK government is threatening to arrest people for retweets. And we're expanding the boundaries of criminality for online behavior, and that's just really scary, right? And you can't do that kind of enforcement if people are pseudonymous. So I'm expecting a real sort of pushback against pseudo-anonymity, both from the old school, surveillance worries, but also the AI worries as well, which is now we're worried about deep fakes. And instead of worrying about how we actually detect deep fakes and reason about what's real or not, we're just going to install digital identity all over the world and presume that solves the problem. When, of course, the kind of people who are nation states manipulating people's minds, they're going to get around that. And that's the main problem with these is criminals are really good at jumping through the compliance hoops. And all it is everyday people get lumbered with dystopian technologies to log into.
Excellent thoughts, and I'm sad to say that we're over our scheduled time for the discussion part, and we need to move on to the Q&A. But Jaya, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Nick is a very good guest to continue the ID paradigm versus credential paradigm discussion with. So maybe we want to do that in the near future with him. How do you feel about that?
That sounds great.
Okay, so
I'm in.
stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back on one of these on yet another very interesting topic. But for now, let's move on to your questions. Thanks for the lovely questions once again, starting with the Matrix questions. John Smith is asking, I can't put these on screen, so just believe me that they are coming from John Smith from Matrix. John Smith is asking you, Nick, having a PhD in physics, why did you decide to do crypto?
That's an interesting question, quite a long answer for that one. But I moved from physics into teaching mathematics, which is where I taught a course on cryptography, which is where I sort of fell in love with blockchains and their potential. But it was a few years later where I moved into governance research, and I was working in decentralized organizations when the DAO happened. And when I realized you could take massively scaling decentralized organizations on chain, and it was the solution to being able to really scale mass organization. That was the thing that got me into there. So really a calling. I had no choice. Since about 2016, 17, I've often regretted making the choice to jump into crypto, but it's not like I had a choice, to be honest. I just felt like it was an important thing to work on.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us, I think that the crypto crowd and DAO crowd and decentralized technologies crowd, the real one, minus the hypey one, is a really like varied bunch. Just look at Jaya. Jaya, how did you end up in crypto? You're not a cryptographer either.
No, I'm not a cryptographer. I'm a political economist, digital geographer. Did my PhD in digital geography, which was actually a political analysis of the Bitcoin and Ethereum protocols. And I did that because way back in the day, I was involved in a lot of kind of anarchist organizing and a lot of decentralized media activism, including the Indie Media Network way back. And then Bitcoin happened, and I started to see a whole bunch of weirdos kind of coming together around this tech that said it was decentralized and that it was, a reaction to the financial crisis. And at the time, I was doing a lot of research in Greece, which was hit badly by the financial crisis. So I was naturally quite interested. But what I really wanted to find out was, what's bringing all these people together from wildly different backgrounds. I mean, the left, the right, conspiracy theorists and central bankers, you name it, like everybody was looking at this tech. And I wanted to try and make sense of it. So as I started doing that, Ethereum came up, and the PhD ended up being a kind of deep dive into those two protocols with a lot of findings that I actually think are still very relevant. But yeah, that was back in 2016, 17. Yeah.
We can drop a link. I combine those two. So drop a link to Jaya's PhD thesis. It's an interesting read to the chat. You can find that later on. And moving on to the next question.
The title is Disassembling the Trust Machine.
Yes, excellent title. Excellent work. Before we move on, actually, I need to ask you guys, are you fine staying over by about 10 minutes or so? Because we're almost done with our time, but we still have a bunch of community questions. Are you okay,
good.
Nick?
Yeah.
Okay,
no
great. Next question, also from John Smith, also from Matrix. Can a DAO somehow help to improve privacy, and how? You already alluded to this, Nick, but I think this is a really interesting and important question. So take it away.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. For one, on the AI front, my current thesis is that we can prove that people can govern their own AIs and allow them. One of the big things I'm worried about with centralized AIs is that they become the kind of new oracle of truth, right? So people they're not going to Google anymore. The primary source is basically dead, and everyone gets their truth from an API that is governed by a centralized company that has an agenda, right? It has an agenda to either maximize profits at the very least, But really, that is like it's epistemologically a problem for society. Like we're going to lose grip of, we're going to hand off truth to a centralized organization. And that's a big problem. So one of the things is sovereignty as much as privacy is what DAOs are really great at, which is like this group of people decide to govern a model, and its attitude and its data pipelines are all selected by that group. So yeah, really one of the things that I'm super interested in is, can people get paid for, these AIs are good because of our data. Like they are literally a manifestation of the data that's within them. And all of that data has been stolen from us and from our ancestors, basically. And the company making money out of it is like, it's not passing any of that value back to humanity who actually created the thing. So I'm very interested in how we can regain control of these things. And part of that will need to be, I'm sharing my data to this model and improving it and retaining privacy over my data. So sovereign control of data and maintaining privacy of that data, because that's how it maintains its value. One of my big sort of theses is actually, okay, people are going to get creeped out by these AIs who are just knowing a bit too much about them. Like I met a guy who was diagnosed with MS from a Facebook ad many years ago. It's like, he's struggling with multiple sclerosis, and then he found out later date that he had it just because it was watching his Googling. We're going to see that, but way worse with AIs. So there's going to be that freak out, but there's also going to be, hold on, I can make money from my data. And there's a financial dynamic that was like, hold on, I've been giving this data away for free forever. So for me, data syndicates and people coordinating through DAOs to create data that they protect and monetize together is probably the thing that's going to be the moment where people go, actually, I just made $500 from my data. I'm going to stop giving it to Meta for free. So that's maybe in the kind of narrative movement. I think DAOs might step in there.
Yeah, I think it's just a quick note on that, because the artist Holly Herndon did this a few years ago, which was super interesting. I'm not sure if she's the first, but she definitely is the first to my mind to have actually tried this out in practice. So what she did was she trained a model on her own voice, open sourced the use of that model, but with the governance of a DAO. And there was a kind of economic cycle going on there too, where like any proceeds made from like the use of her voice in kind of subsequent artworks or songs or whatever, those proceeds would go back to the DAO, and the funds would be kind of governed collectively there. So that was like a super interesting, the first kind of combination of this sort of like home trained, self-sovereign AI combined with interesting kind of DAO governance. I'm not actually sure what happened with the project though, but it would be nice to kind of try and follow up and see what the outcomes were.
It would, absolutely.
Okay, we have a bunch of other questions. I'm not going to open a can of worms here about monetizing your data. So maybe that's also a topic to add to our list for the next conversation. Next question is on YouTube from our beloved contributor Rocio. Hi there, Rocio. Thanks for another great question. Do you believe, Nick and Jaya, that any third party with whom data is shared meets strict privacy and security standards? I guess this is a general question to the, and also kind of a pointed one, I guess.
I mean, I'm guessing it's almost a leading question. I mean, the short answer is like absolutely not.
Yeah, it's laughable, actually, isn't it? I mean, yeah. You only need to see the data breaches. Like you can actually go and look at. There's a live dashboard that you can look at in the UK. The ICO, the Information Commission, keeps a dashboard of all the data breaches, and it's tens of thousands a year, like something like 70, 80,000 a year. Basically, all data gets hacked eventually, right? There is basically no safe system for people's private information, which is just borne out in the evidence of it keeps getting hacked. So yeah, the proof is in the pudding on that one.
Yeah, what definitely, I particularly love. Sorry, Jay.
Sorry, go ahead.
A quick point on this. What I particularly love, which actually happened to me, is when my data gets leaked through a data breach from a party which I never actually shared it with. So like one of these gray, faceless data brokers leaked my data, so I found out that my email and some other stuff was compromised through them. That's the best. Like, that's actually top-notch stuff. All of us want that stuff in our lives, right? Sorry, Jaya, go ahead. I had to interject this. What's happening?
Sorry. I was looking for the window because I was looking at the ICO data breach dashboard. No, what I was going to say was a kind of like additional point to Rocio's question. That's why we need infrastructure that doesn't just ask people to meet strict privacy and security standards, but that is guaranteed by design by the infrastructure itself, right? And this is again kind of where I'm personally not satisfied with kind of compliance with something like GDPR, but actually want to see that implemented for continuous enforcement in the actual designs of infrastructure itself, right? And that's where we can actually start to see something real happen, because just begging people to be nice doesn't really work when you're dealing with a global information infrastructure with potential huge wins to be made by scammers and fraudsters.
Exactly. Moving on to the next question. This one is from Janice, and let's make it a quick fire round because we can talk about all of these questions probably for ages, and I don't want to keep you here for 2 more hours. So, what can be done to prevent misinformation from AI-generated content? Nick, go first. 2 sentences.
Oh, I could do hours on this. We need better social consensus machinery for people to deliberate what's real or not. So the only way that we find out what's real, like facts are essentially a social consensus phenomenon. What is a fact is what we all agree is real and true. So we need better systems of so community notes, but better.
Excellent. Jaya?
Stop trying to build AGI and careful curation of data on smaller models that are actually meaningful for real use would go a long way. And then
right.
secure enclaves of information networks that ditch AI entirely.
All right. Thanks for that answer, guys. Moving on to the next question, which is from Alex. Thanks for the question, Alex. On a serious note, do you think the skyrocketing valuations with AI releases were justified? Did we overestimate or underestimate what AI can do? This is a really good question.
Yeah.
Jaya, go
Excellent
first.
question. Jaya, go.
No, actually,
I would say short answer is yes. But no, skyrocketing valuations, whether they're justified or not, is a kind of like weird one because yes, they're justified as long as the bubble holds, right? So when you're kind of doing the valuation, the people doing the valuation are they take that financialized approach, right? So the valuation makes sense in terms of the financial models that they're running. So yes, it's justified because likely, the models are correct up until the point where all of a sudden the whole thing crashes. So, it's justified from a very niche perspective of how can we pump this and make some money? It's not justified from a kind of perspective of does this do good for society? Did we overestimate or underestimate what AI can do? I think both. I think, unfortunately, this AI versus humans superstition is really quite a blocker to exploring the real value of AI, and locks innovation into the silos of these big giants that are just going to kind of sit on it. So yeah, I think unfortunately both. We're both overestimating and underestimating because we're caught in that dystopia, utopia narrative and not actually breaking out and understanding that kind of real world value that comes from closer collaboration in real world settings.
Yeah, my answer was both as well. The way I think about it, there's like a kind of universal tech tree, right? That potentially is shared by all civilizations in the universe. Mathematics is one of them, and from that comes things like AI. This is transformative technology. It's one of the things that potentially all civilizations, if they get advanced enough in the universe, can do. It's huge, right? It's like unlocking the new digital fire. Are the valuations currently ridiculous? Yes. Right. None of these things have business models yet. Some of them are hemorrhaging money, and they're based on this thesis that you can just scale your way to God. And I actually don't have much moat. Like, unlike traditional tech, particularly infrastructural stuff, it's very difficult to defend a moat with AI. So I think you'll see some of these giant models, they're going to spend 100 million on training a model, and they'll be irrelevant within weeks. So I think we're due a bubble and a bubble burst as well.
Absolutely. Moving on to the next question, which is from Beyond, beloved community contributor. Thanks for the question. What private services do you use? I mean, mobile OS, desktop OS, email, messenger, storage, browser, etc., etc. Let's start with you, Nick.
Yeah, I'll be using Nym VPN, I think, when that comes out. I use a VPN, which actually makes the internet very difficult to use. It's one of the most annoying things about it. You just get captured all over the place. So I use Mulvad as my VPN service because you can pay in Bitcoin. I use Proton Mail, Signal, and yeah, I'd like, and we're building some custom zero knowledge proof stuff for voting and digital identity. So we're building some tooling that we're going to start dog fooding ourselves soon on that front. So I'm a big fan of like ZooPass. I don't know if you've come across that yet, which is an open source library for digital identity. I'm very keen on that. That's worth checking out as well. But for the moment, yeah, nothing. I'm kind of disappointed by a lot of it. I would love to see more very usable privacy technology is the next major frontier for me.
What about you, Jaya?
Yeah, the difficulty with making usable privacy technology is that because the internet was not built with privacy in mind, when you add privacy, it breaks the internet. Like, it's kind of that simple. Which sucks because it means that you need to build out an entirely new ecosystem around this new logic of privacy at its core. So we have an uphill battle, people, but it's well worth the work. Mobile OS, I have Android on one phone. Both of them are Fairphones. Android on one phone, and then I have Murena, which is indeed a privacy OS, on the other phone. Desktop OS, I use iOS, nothing exciting there. Email, I use Proton and Thunderbird. Messenger, Signal, and Matrix. Browser, Firefox and Google Browser, with DuckDuckGo as my default search engine at the moment. Yeah.
Not going to answer this question. All I'm going to say is that I'm still like in my privacy journey. I still use Windows, for example, because nothing else actually works for the stuff that I want to use it for, except for Apple OS, which I will never ever buy. So yeah, I do try to maintain my privacy as much as possible. The thing that is really infuriating is that most privacy preserving tech, just look at Matrix, is great on paper, but not there in terms of UI and UX. And also maturity. So I'm really looking forward to a world where these tools are a bit more mature and have like a bit more traction with the normies, with the average people, and not just us privacy-minded folks. There's one more question, which I hope we still have time for before we say goodbye today, which is also from Rocio. Thanks for another great question. In terms of data protection, which country has an appropriate law that can serve as an example for other territories? This is also a great question. Jaya, go first.
Yeah, I'm going to have to answer and then run because I actually am late for another meeting. Good question, Rocio. To be honest, like if you take the time to actually read the GDPR, it's really radical. Like, if that was actually enforced and implemented, like, oh my God, everything would change. So I actually think the GDPR still is the gold standard for privacy protections. It's just that, unfortunately, there wasn't, like, to my mind, what needs to happen when an ambitious piece of regulation like this rolls out is there needs to be insane budgets associated with it to fund innovation around that piece of regulation to build it out in practice, not just kind of as a compliance exercise, because compliance exercise is only something that big tech can afford to do, and it's a real pain in the ass for everybody else, including users. So regulators really shoot themselves in the foot by only thinking in terms of compliance and not like putting out major kind of blue sky funding tracks that go hand in hand with regulatory initiatives like that. But yeah, I would say GDPR honestly is still the gold standard.
I agree, actually. There's lots in the kind of EU frameworks that would actually be great for privacy if they were actually deployed. The thing I would say about this is like what regulations are missing is actual scientific evidence. So people make these things and roll them out without actually knowing if they're going to work, or not make things worse, actually, which is a lot of the times is where they get worse. So like scientifically robust decision making around these things, they should be deployed with randomized control trials. They should have like real statistically significant evidence to say that they're good. And that's largely what's missing. And that's what I'd want to see before anything is rolled out to other territories, right? It needs to be proven to work somewhere well before it's rolled out anywhere, frankly.
That's a great point, Nick. Jaya, I can let you go if you want. So
absolute
Nick, thanks
pleasure.
for joining.
Love the conversation. Good to be connected again with the community. Hi, everybody out there. Thanks for the questions.
Evening, boss.
Ciao.
Catch you later. Bye. So what I wanted to add there, Nick, excellent point. The other thing that's missing, I will send you in private, and also maybe Salazar, if you could drop it in chat, my conversation with our advisor, Bart Pernille. He talks quite a bit about regulations, mostly. So I asked him this question: what is up with the two faces of the EU when it comes to privacy? He likes to say this, that the EU, on one hand, is absolutely revolutionary when it comes to privacy. On the other hand, I get questions from community members, legitimate questions, who are skeptical about the fact that some of our funding comes from EU, and research that led up to technologies within Nym, both the MixNet and Coconut Credentials was initially EU funded. People are really skeptical about the EU when it comes to privacy, and for a good reason, right? And he says, besides what you're just saying, science, or go home, there's that aspect of it. We can look into these things with the methodologies that we have. We can gather information in a proper scientific way that's not being applied, but also experts and relevant people are often not being contacted and consulted before decisions are made, which is also a big problem. So if you make for example, the client-side scanning debacle that they tried to push through twice, fortunately it failed both times, is mostly misguided from a technological perspective. So they actually don't understand the implications when it comes to end-to-end encryption and surveillance, and it's just a matter of consulting the right experts, just having a chat with us, bringing them on one of these calls and just having these conversations could really open their perspective to the broader implications of what they are proposing. Now, with all of that said, this brings us to the end of the call, actually. Nick, Jaya's gone, so I can't thank her, but definitely thank you for joining. This has been really, really great, and I meant it. We're going to have to do the next episode, which is going to be the ID paradigm and possible ways to replace it. I think that's a pretty interesting conversation. How do you feel about that?
Sounds fantastic. Enjoyed talking to both of you a lot. It's been a great chat. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. Thanks for coming on. And the last thing that we do, it's a tradition here at Nym, those community members who join these calls get to commemorate these calls by getting an NFT for participating. So you need to go to the same link. Salazar, please show it on screen and send it in chat. Yes, go to this link. You can also mint one for yourself, by the way, Nick, nymtech.net/go/POAP. And the secret phrase for today is 1,000 DAOs a day, spelling right here. Which I already asked Nick about. Good luck with that, friend. I hope it becomes a reality. DAOs are absolutely amazing, and I think once the hype dies down and it's not gonna be like a target of that hypey stuff, but we start to actually explore the tangible real world value of DAOs, it's gonna actually revolutionize the world. Didn't happen initially, mostly because of the hype, but it will. I'm pretty sure that it will happen. So I'm super bullish on DAOs. So good luck with that project.
Thanks, man. Me too.
And with all of that said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching this community call. The recording will, of course, be available on the Nym YouTube under the live tab. A big thanks for the amazing questions, as always. Hopefully you enjoyed this chat. If you have any feedback about the call or anything that was said, any questions to Nick or myself or whatever, you can reach out to us on Telegram, Matrix, or even Discord, although I don't check my Discord that often. Big thanks for joining, everybody. Have a nice rest of the